Pick up anything you're wearing right now. Feel the seam. That stitched edge holding two pieces of fabric together is the reason you're alive. Not metaphorically, literally. Because 50,000 years ago, one person, somewhere in the frozen darkness of Siberia, sat down with a sliver of bird bone, thinner than a matchstick, and solved a problem that no other species on Earth had ever thought to solve. Not how to stay warm. Every animal does that. How to wear another animal's skin better than that animal ever could. The needle they made is sitting in a museum in Novosibirsk right now. It is 7 centimeters long. It has a perfectly drilled eye. And when researchers first dated it in 2016, they had to check the results 3 times because the species that made it wasn't supposed to be capable of that yet. Let's start with what that actually means. The needle was found in Denisovan cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. It was made by Denisovans, a species of ancient human we didn't even know existed until 2010. Not Homo sapiens, not Neanderthals. A third kind of human known almost entirely from fragments of bone and a single finger and one needle. A needle so precisely constructed that archaeologists described it without exaggeration as the most technologically sophisticated object ever found from that period. The eye wasn't punched through, it was drilled with a tool made specifically for drilling, which means the person who made this needle also made the tool that made the needle. That is 2 levels of forward planning before the first stitch was ever pulled. But here's what most documentaries skip entirely. The needle itself wasn't the invention. The invention was what the needle made possible. Before the needle, clothing was tied or draped. Animal hides wrapped around a body and held with strips of sinew or thorns. Functional, barely. A draped hide has gaps at the shoulders, the sides, the neck. In Siberian winter, those gaps aren't uncomfortable. They're fatal. Wind moving through a gap in clothing at minus 40 degrees doesn't just chill you. It creates a convective cycle that strips heat from your core faster than your body can produce it. Modern hypothermia research shows that a gap as small as 2 centimeters at the wrist or collar can reduce the effective insulation of an entire garment by up to 40%. The needle closed the gaps. Every seam stitched tight was a death sentence avoided. That is not craft. That is engineering with a body count attached to every mistake. And the engineering didn't stop at closing gaps. Archaeological evidence from sites across Siberia and the Russian Arctic dating to this period shows something that stopped researchers cold. The clothing wasn't single layer. It was composite. Multiple hides selected from different animals, layered in a precise sequence that matched the thermal physics modern winter gear designers spent decades calculating from scratch. Innermost layer, Arctic hair or fox fur, fine and dense, facing inward against the skin. This layer trapped a thin column of warm air directly against the body, the same principle as thermal base layers today. Next layer, reindeer hide, de-haired on the inner surface, fur facing outward. Reindeer fur is hollow. Each individual hair shaft is a sealed air pocket. The insulation value per millimeter of reindeer fur exceeds every natural fiber on Earth. Modern Arctic sleeping bag manufacturers still use reindeer hide as the benchmark material against which synthetic insulation is measured. Outermost layer, wolf or wolverine fur at the collar and cuffs specifically. Not for warmth, for moisture management. Wolverine fur has a unique molecular structure that prevents ice crystal formation even at extreme temperatures. Inuit and Arctic peoples used wolverine fur around face openings for exactly this reason for thousands of years. It is still used in modern Arctic military gear for the same reason. The same property, the same placement, discovered independently 50,000 years apart. Someone 50,000 years ago understood moisture management at the molecular level without knowing what a molecule was. They just knew that one fur didn't ice up and others did. And they put it exactly where ice formation would kill you. But none of this composite system worked without the needle, because composite layered clothing isn't just stacked hides. It requires fitted construction. Each layer cut to shape, sized to the body, stitched to move with the wearer rather than against them. A garment that binds at the shoulder or restricts the knee in minus 40-degree conditions isn't clothing. It's a trap. Your movement slows. Your circulation reduces. Your core temperature drops. The garment that was supposed to save you becomes the thing that kills you. Fit required tailoring. Tailoring required a needle, fine enough to stitch without tearing the hide, strong enough not to snap under tension, and equipped with an eye small enough to thread sinew through through without weakening the stitch point. The Denisovan needle meets all three requirements, precisely, not approximately. A modern tailor examining the object confirmed it would function perfectly by current standards for fine leatherwork, 50,000 years old. Functionally perfect by modern standards. Now here's where it gets extraordinary. Experimental archaeologists attempting to replicate the needle using only period-appropriate tools found that producing a single needle of equivalent quality required between 8 and 12 hours of focused work. The drilling of the eye alone, using a stone micro drill rotating between the palms, took between 2 and 4 hours without a single mistake allowed. One slip and the eye cracks. The needle is destroyed. 8 hours of work lost. Start again. That is not a person solving an immediate problem. That is a person making an investment, spending a full day of labor on a single object because they understood that the object's value over its lifetime exceeded the cost of making it. That is economic reasoning. Abstract future planning. The cognitive architecture we typically associate with civilization, not with a species we classify as prehistoric. And the knowledge didn't stay in one cave. Needle technology spread, not slowly, rapidly. Sites across a 3,000-kilometer range show needle adoption within what is, in archaeological terms, a single cultural moment, which means someone taught someone else, who taught someone else. A technology transfer across hundreds of kilometers of frozen landscape passed person to person, generation to generation, without writing, without diagrams, without anything except demonstration and memory. The clothing tradition that the needle enabled survived in an unbroken chain. The composite layered garment system developed in Siberia 50,000 years ago is functionally identical to the system used by Inuit, Yupik, and Evenki peoples well into the modern era. Same layers, same animal selections, same placement logic, same construction principles, preserved across 2,000 generations of oral and practical transmission without a single written word. When Norwegian explorer Fridtjof Nansen prepared for his 1888 Greenland crossing, he abandoned European wool clothing entirely and adopted Inuit composite garment construction. He was the only member of his expedition who suffered no frostbite. His companions in European gear suffered severely. Nansen spent the rest of his life documenting Inuit clothing technology and publicly credited it as the reason he survived. He was using a system that was already 49,000 years old when he put it on. When NASA developed EVA suit insulation systems for extreme environment operations, their engineers studied Arctic indigenous clothing construction as a primary reference, the layered composite principle, the moisture management placement, the fitted construction allowing full range of motion without gap formation, the same solutions, reached by the same logic, separated by 50,000 years and the entire distance between a Siberian cave and a clean room in Houston. Here's the part that should stop you completely. The person who made that needle never knew any of this. They didn't know they were solving thermodynamics. They didn't know their solution would outlast every empire, every religion, every language spoken by every civilization that rose and fell in the time between their hands and yours. They sat in a cave in the dark, in the cold, and they drilled a hole in a piece of bird bone because the alternative was watching someone they loved freeze to death. That is the entire history of human intelligence in a single object. Not genius for its own sake, not invention for the pleasure of it. Problem, consequence, solution. The consequence was death. The solution was a hole in a bone 7 centimeters long. Pick up anything you're wearing again. Find a seam, run your finger along it. Every stitch in that seam is the direct descendant of a thread pulled through the eye of a needle in a cave in Siberia 50,000 years ago by someone whose name we will never know, whose face we can't picture, whose language made no sound we would recognize. They couldn't have imagined you. But everything you're wearing proves they were already thinking about your survival long before you existed to need it.